Hey everyone, this is Nikachu, Merfolk Master and Pro Player, and we are here for the Patreon Ask Me Anything for December 2017, and we have some very interesting questions coming from my patrons, and so let's get into it. So the first question, everyone wants to know, what on earth could we possibly get out of Rivals for Ixalan? And you know what? Jonathan Jolin is asking, what kind of tool would you like to see, realistically, in Rivals of Ixalan? What is missing with Merfolk to find a place in the first tier of Modern? There's a few things I would love to see. So the first one would be a really powerful one-drop, preferably blue. I mean, we thought we saw it with Kumena Speaker, and I think we did see it with Kumena Speaker, but you know what? We could still have another one. If that Siren Storm Tamer could have been a Merfolk, that would have been it for sure. That is like counterspell on a one-drop and had evasion. It was just perfect, but we didn't have that. So I'm always looking for, I mean, in a fantasy world, I'm looking for something like a Champion of the Parish as a Merfolk attached to it. But if it's not something like that, realistically, we could look for. There's always a hexproof version of a Lord for a lot of creature types. Like Fairies has one. We could have one. Like, why can't we have a hexproof version of a Merfolk? 3 mana, all other creatures have hexproof, get +1/+1 in hexproof. That would be fantastic. That would be super great. I would love also maybe to see a land that can help bounce our Merfolk back to our hand, or maybe an Arcane Laboratory reprint to bring Merfolk or Wizards from our graveyard back on top of our library. Anything that could, you know, help us fight in an attrition-based war. Or maybe we can get a new Curse Catcher. Oh, how about that? How about we get like a blue that can sacrifice and counter target, like a mana leak on a Merfolk for non-creature spells. How about that? That would be interesting, wouldn't it? We have Curse Catcher, but then we get the Super Curse Catcher for 2 mana. That would be a very interesting design. So those things would help. I would love to see something like that. Help us grind a little bit better. Help us with counter spells. Those are all useful. And you're asking also, would a green-blue land like Wanderwine Hub be good? Or a Mana Dork Merfolk that would give us a better use of Collected Company or whatever? And yeah, do you know what? Blue-green Wanderwine Hub, I'm totally welcoming that. Would be wonderful. Or just any sort of other sort of blue-green land design that is eternally playable would be fantastic. The Mana Dork, I don't think we really need that much because Noble Hierarch is a pretty damn good by itself. Maybe 1 blue, 1/1 Merfolk that can add blue or green mana could be fine. Or maybe it just adds green mana, I don't know. But I think Noble Hierarch is pretty good. And unfortunately, it just did not stand up to the to scrutiny. It ended up not being good enough going into the future. Lightning Bolt, too good against it. Did not replace Aether Vial. So I'm not really excited to see any sort of Mana Dorks being printed in Rivals of Ixalan. But I would love to see a Lord. I would love to see something that gives our creatures hexproof or can protect our creatures. I love lands. Give us lands that can return Merfolk either back to our hand or from our graveyard back on top of our library. So those are some things I would love to see coming out of Rivals from Ixalan. So moving on, we've got Edward S. Do you play more paper or online? You once commented something like, Magic the Gathering Online is the meta. Your local game is skewed. For sure that is accurate. That is an accurate statement. What I feel is that Magic the Gathering Online is fairly quick to shift versus local events. What's your experience? And that is exactly what it is. So to answer your first part of the question, I play way more online than I do in paper Magic. You can just get in so many more games, so much faster. It's way more, you don't have to leave your house. I can play just like 1 or 2 matches and then pick up the rest of the league whenever I want. If I have just a little bit of time, I just squeeze in 1 match. Nothing hard there. Just throw myself in the queue, or just play a league and just play one match. No big deal. And I also like playing online because it sharpens my skills. The players there, they're tough, they're strong. There's a lot of strong players. World-class players play online. Not to say that personally my local game store is pretty good. It's a pretty tough crowd. And for the big events, a lot of sharks come out, so they're wonderfully competitive tournaments, and I still go out there for fun, but for the most part I cut my teeth online, and most of my play is done online. But I still play a decent chunk of paper when I can. It's just more time consuming for the most part. Yeah, online is more skewed, online is the real deal, because once you hit competitive leagues, the only decks that are going to exist there are the ones that can stand the heat of the metagame. So if you're playing a deck, let's say, pretty good example is Adza and Company. That is the type of deck that if it's hated out, it becomes dead. Like, there might be too much removal, or there's just too much graveyard hate. It's at the whim of the opponent's sideboard, or even just the types of decks that exist at the time of just in the time period. If the metagame is too harsh, the deck becomes unplayable. So people have to switch for decks that can compete. And that's what makes the Magic the Gathering online meta so genuine and real. So the best decks that are winning online are the ones that I would expect to be winning also on paper. That's not always the case. Sometimes we see innovations on paper that get applied online. Or maybe this is not the greatest example, because the player that won a GP with Burn, with Shrine of the Burning Rage, won on paper, and then that started to get adopted very highly online. But that guy practiced online in the first place. So he was struggling with Burn, he found out that Shrine of the Burning Rage worked online, and then applied it to the paper Magic. So that was a great example of how online sharpens you up and trains you properly for paper Magic. But sometimes that idea didn't have any influence online until he could win on paper. Because right now, let's not forget that Magic the Gathering online published results are super, they're hand-picked by Wizards of the Coast. They're not genuine. They used to be randomly, the 5 zeros from competitive leagues were randomly chosen and published, but now they're just picking whatever looks fun and unique, and they're trying to make sure that certain archetypes don't look overrepresented, because, oh, Death Shadow has 13 or 15%, that has to be the best deck, let's all jump on Death Shadow. And then more and more people start playing Death Shadow, and whether it's good or not doesn't matter, because whatever goes 5-0, if half the people are playing Death Shadow, then a huge number of them are going to have to get 5 zeros one way or another, even if it was with luck or skill, and then it gets published even more. So they have this creative idea of deflating everything, but unfortunately that makes it difficult to find out what is actually good, what is actually winning. So the lists, the published stuff, not a very good place to gauge what's actually winning, what's winning more than other stuff. I think you just have to dive into competitive leagues, see what's actually being played, what's holding up to scrutiny, because those decks wouldn't be there if they didn't win. I mean, you're only going to play an archetype for so long, get your head beaten in for so long, until you're like going to either move down to the friendly leagues, or you're going to just change your deck and play something else. So yeah, that's that. And then your local game store is just a much smaller pool of players. I mean, my local game store at any given time has like a lot of Burn, a lot of Affinity, a lot of Tron, and a lot of Control. Those are the big, super powerful archetypes in my local game store. And I think Death Shadow is catching on quite a bit as well. And, it can be different for other local game stores. Maybe your local game store has more Ponza. Maybe your local game store has more Death and Taxes. Maybe your local game store has more Elves. So it's different from place to place because, you know, you have a much smaller portion of people, so you can end up having a completely different skewed metagame. And it's harder to switch your deck on paper. Online, you can very easily just liquidate the entire thing and then buy another one, not too expensive. Whereas on paper, you know, you make this investment and you're going to be stuck with it for a little while. And if you're going to change, it's going to take some time before you're going to switch it, unless you're part of a team. But you know what? Not everyone can be part of a team. So yeah, your local game, everyone's local game store is pretty skewed. It's not the real meta. So like if you have a deck that ends up doing really well at your local game store, well, you better be prepared for like the tech that has been prepared online. You know, if Pawns is doing really well online, if Breach Shift is doing very well online, if Eldrazi or any of those other decks are doing well online, they're eventually going to find their way to paper. Just like how like Jund Death Shadow broke out at Grand Prix Vancouver. That thing was already winning tons online, and it made its way into the paper meta. And you would have been prepared for it if you had played online in the first place. So, yeah, I think, yeah, the meta shifts very quickly online, and then people on paper will just copy whatever's doing very well online. Oh, this list published, I'm gonna play this thing. And so basically, paper Magic are the followers to what's happening online, for the most part. Not always. Sometimes an SCG event will inspire some people, but it's usually that way around. And lastly, we've got Jeremy Fabre. Hey Nikachu, am I crazy to think that Branchwalker is not so great after all? She feels very unreliable. Any advice on how to use her effectively? And you know what, Jeremy? I'm glad you asked. I'm so happy because so many other people have this opinion, and I'm telling you what. I think Merfolk Branchwalker is not being given a fair shake. Merfolk Branchwalker gives our deck tons of consistency, gives our deck also a few more turn 4 kills, and let me explain. So, let's say you make a top deck at the end of your game for the win. Who's responsible for that? Who's Merfolk Branchwalker? You know, it doesn't feel like it that much, but you know, your turn 2 Merfolk Branchwalker, if she draws a card, or if you explore your top card into the graveyard, improves the odds of drawing something you want for the rest of the game. And that's the part of Merfolk Branchwalker people just don't feel. I feel like Merfolk Branchwalker is going to be something like Curse Catcher, where every so often people are going to question, is this thing really good? Like, do we need this? I don't feel like I'm ever countering anything. Or even Master of Waves. Do we really need Master of Waves? I'm like winning my games without him, and whenever I have him in my hand, he's too expensive, and then when I play him, he dies. Like, these cards are very, very good, but they're very hard to appreciate when they don't look so hot. And I understand Merfolk Branchwalker, 2/1 creature pretty often, not looking very impressive, but the fact of the matter is that drawing the card is really useful. It's very hard to evaluate, like when you draw that land, how mana efficient the rest of your game gets, because you're able to hit all your land drops for and curve out for the rest of the game. Maybe on turn 4 or turn 5, you're able to play 2 things at once that you would not have been able to unless you didn't have that Merfolk Branchwalker. Sometimes it's hard to appreciate that extra bit of power that allows you to block or make it harder for your opponent to block Merfolk Branchwalker, just because it's just 1 power larger. And there's so many games where you have Exaxes. You better remember the games where you have Exaxes. Thanks to Merfolk Branchwalker being +1/+1 more, that game was closed out right then and there. Not to mention, you know, we've got like cool tricks up our sleeve with the upkeep thing of scrying, Vile in Merfolk Branchwalker, scry, either whatever it is, to the bottom, or dig for whatever we need. And so I guess the biggest things would, however, be she improves our top decks, for sure. We saw it actually in my last league, where we were top decking Lords for the win, and we would not have top decked those Lords if we didn't have an like Silver Guild number 5 to 8 in the form of Merfolk Branchwalker. And another thing that I would say is that it improves our chances of drawing our sideboard cards. I know I'm signing out Merfolk Branchwalker basically in some matchups where Lords are much more important than card advantage, but against all the other archetypes, we want to draw our sideboard cards like, you know, as badly as possible, and Merfolk Branchwalker gives us more consistency, helps us dig for those sideboard cards, and we can reliably find them more often when we have a Merfolk Branchwalker in our deck. So gives much more consistency overall, helps find the sideboard cards, helps find our top decks. What I'm guessing is that it's hard to recognize, and the reason for that is you like play Merfolk Branchwalker on turn 2, but then you top deck your bomb on turn 7, and so much has happened between Merfolk Branchwalker to your top deck bomb on turn 7 that you don't feel it. You don't feel like, oh, it was the Merfolk Branchwalker's ability. Oh, it's hard to give credit to Merfolk Branchwalker in those situations because so much time has passed. So I think Merfolk Branchwalker is going to be a card everyone's going to question once in a while, but it's just key to the deck, key to the consistency, and it's just a wonderful card. I don't have any problems with it at all. Whenever you top deck for the win, you look to see about whether if you had played Merfolk Branchwalker and drew any cards. And also, I have to say, if Tectonic Edge becomes well positioned, I think Merfolk Branchwalker even skyrockets more in value. If there are more utility lands that get printed, Merfolk Branchwalker is going to skyrocket in value because, you know, drawing those lands aren't going to be just like, you know, random lands. They're actually going to have a purpose. So finding Tectonic Edges, putting them in your hand, that's serious card advantage. Maybe Ghost Quarter becomes positioned at some point and we throw some Ghost Quarters in and we draw them. Mutavault, already a good man land that we could use. Oh, maybe to answer Jonathan Jolin, we could use another Merfolk man land. Would that not be great? Could we not use I mean, we could squeeze that in. 4 Mutavaults, 4 man lands, 2 Cavern of Souls, 10 islands. Hell, that would be perfect. So we could use something that doesn't come into play tap though. That's important. So even if it was like 1 blue, activate 1/1 Merfolk, I'm in, and comes into play untapped. That would be beautiful. Ship me the new Merfolk manland. So yeah, so that's what I think about Merfolk Branchwalker. So thank you very much, all you guys, for all your questions. They were fantastic. A lot of discussion to be had here. So yeah, this has been Nikachu answering the questions from my Patreon AMA.